This is an excerpt from Startling Incidents and Experiences in the Christian Life by Enoch E.E.Byrum. A Plot to Murder. Soon after entering the publishing work, I had an experience which, through a train of circumstances that followed, I had reasons to vividly remember. At the time mentioned, Brothers Speck and Kilpatrick, who were evangelists, were holding meetings in Kansas and Nebraska. A man named J.W. Wyrick attended one of their meetings. At that time, he was making a high profession of religion and claimed to be a minister of the gospel. His life was not in accordance with his profession, and as the word was preached, his evil deeds began to be revealed. The brethren found him to be more like a demon than a man of God. It became known, among many other things, that he frequently beat and misused his wife. She very much desired to be saved from her sins, and for that reason one night at the meeting she went forward and knelt at the altar of prayer. He came with a large stick or cane in his hand and demanded her to leave the altar and go home, and made quite a disturbance in the meeting. His wife begged one of the sisters in the church to accompany her home, as otherwise she was likely to receive a terrible beating. He further made an effort to break up the meeting and also threatened the lives of the ministers. In writing a report of their meetings for publication, these ministers wrote an exposure of this man so that congregations in other places might not be imposed upon, as he had already made arrangements to go elsewhere to preach. While publishing the issue of the paper that contained his exposure, I well remember the difficulties we encountered in operating our printing press and other machinery that night. The brother who was with me in the work was young and inexperienced, having only had a few weeks' experience in the printing and publishing business. It was an old country Campbell printing press that we were operating, one that had been in use for over 40 years, having, however, been rebuilt a time or two during that period. It was out of alignment, which caused a frequent breaking of the tapes, which carried the papers to their proper place. The engine and boiler also gave us considerable trouble. The inspirator would fail to work properly, causing the water in the boiler to fall below the water gauge. It was a cold night in the winter, and the large office room became so cold that the ink did not distribute properly, and for this reason every few minutes a copy of the paper would stick to the ink roller and become wrapped around it. We would then take the roller out and remove the paper from it, and by the time a few more papers were printed, a tape would break which had to be sewed. A few minutes more of operation and the engine gave us trouble, and later the water became so low that we feared an explosion. By the time these troubles were adjusted, the tapes and ink rollers took their regular turns with the routine of difficulties, which continued until about 2:30 in the morning. On account of our inexperience, we had not discovered that one end of the press had slipped out of its proper place, which misplacement was the cause of much of our trouble. We toiled nearly all night amidst such difficulties, frequently asking the Lord to help us, and many times since then we have considered it remarkable that we were enabled to do any printing under the circumstances, except by the special help of the Lord. We were both inexperienced in regard to many things concerning the workings of the Spirit of God and the manifestations of the power of the enemy. While encountering so many difficulties that night, we wondered if it could possibly be that Satan was hindering the operation of the machinery because of the publication of the report exposing the man mentioned above, as he had threatened vengeance in such cases in case such was published. Just as we got a sufficient number of papers published to supply our subscribers, the press suddenly stopped and we were unable to operate it further or to ascertain the cause of the trouble. After retiring that night, I fell asleep and dreamed. In my dream, I was in the city of Rockford, Illinois, and while walking along the street, without any warning of danger, I suddenly came in contact with this man Wyrick. He seized a large knife or dagger and started at me with a determination to murder me. As I turned away from him, someone seized me by the arm and took me down the street at a greater speed than this man was able to go. When at a proper distance or out of danger, the friend who had taken me by the arm suddenly left me. I continued walking, and soon after, while on another street, I met my adversary again, who rushed at me with more fury than ever. Just then my friend appeared at my side and hastened me to a place of safety and disappeared. My eyes were holden from seeing the one who was helping me, and it was as if the Lord had sent his angel to deliver me in time of danger. I awakened. It was but a dream, but the impression it left was not soon to be forgotten. I had never seen this man who sought to destroy my life. Neither had I ever been to Rockford, Illinois. At this time, I had never had any personal controversy with the man just mentioned, as I was only a young publisher at that time. His venom was mostly poured out against the editor and the ministers who exposed him. But about 2 years later, he wrote me a large postal card, the kind we used to have, containing 535 words. Upon this card he made some threats against the brethren, and even mentioned the editor and 3 ministers whom he said, were it not for the law, would be lying mouldering in their graves, and he a murderer. It was about 7 years after I had the dream before I met the man. He came to a camp meeting held near Grand Junction, Michigan. Soon after his arrival at the depot, he took a position on the railroad platform, and amidst the throngs of people who were arriving for the camp meeting and the strangers who were changing cars, he began to tirade against the publishing company, the editor, and the ministers. He stated that they were guilty of all kinds of misdemeanor, and that he intended to go to the campground, take the pulpit, and expose them, and invited the people to go to the morning service and hear the exposure. Our office was near the depot, and someone informed me of his malicious intentions. I went to my desk and found the card formerly referred to, which he had written something over 5 years before. He had never seen me before, and as I approached him, whilst he was in the midst of his talk to the people, I held a card in my hand and asked him if he recognized it. He glanced at it and said, "Yes, sir, I wrote it myself." "You wrote this card, you say?" "Yes, sir," he replied, and reached out his hand to get it. "No, thank you," I replied. "The contents of this card, having been sent through the United States mail, is sufficient to send you over the road." "Let me have it," he insisted. "No, thank you. You have admitted before these witnesses to have committed a penitentiary act." I turned and left him, while the crowd of people roared and laughed and cheered until he was utterly confounded. He tried to make an explanation to the people, and then started for the campground, asking them to follow him. Upon his arrival at the campground, the song service had just commenced, and the large auditorium was well filled with people. A few persons had followed him through curiosity. The usher escorted him to a seat near the pulpit, thus giving him an opportunity to carry out his desires that he had planned. After the minister had delivered his sermon, an opportunity was given for anyone else to speak or testify, but this man sat spellbound. 3 or 4 persons gave short talks, and the services were dismissed. The man went quietly out of the auditorium. Some of those who had followed him to the campground asked him why he did not take the pulpit and expose the people as he had said he would do. He replied that he did not have a favorable opportunity, but thought it best to wait until the afternoon. In the afternoon he did the same as he had done in the forenoon. When questioned again, he said he would wait until the night service, as he thought there would be a larger crowd on the grounds then. But during the night service he sat as quiet as before, and was unable to cause any disturbance whatever because of the mighty power of God that was manifested in the meetings. He could not even cause a disturbance by talking against those whom he was intending to expose, unless he went some distance away. Finally, he became so disgusted at his inability to carry out his plan that he left the grounds and did not return during the remainder of the camp meeting. A few weeks later, he sent me a letter stating that he was about 40 miles from our town and was about out of money. He said that he knew of some terrible things of which some of the ministers were guilty, mentioning some things but giving no details, and closing by saying that if we would send him $50, he would leave that part of the country and would say or do nothing further about the matter, at least for the present time. Otherwise, there would likely be some cases in court. His object was to intimidate or frighten us in such a manner as to furnish him the amount of money desired. I wrote him a postal card and told him that if he knew of anyone guilty of such things, the sooner he had them arrested the better, and that if he did not do so, he was laying himself liable to the law. After my card was sent, nothing more was heard from the man for some time. One day, while I was sitting at my office desk, busily engaged at my work, a shrewd-looking gentleman stepped into the open doorway and greeted me with the following words: "I am a United States detective, and I understand that you are doing a fraudulent business here, and I have come to investigate." Like a flash, the thought came to my mind that Mr. Werrick was the instigator of the whole affair. But knowing that the charge was false, and that our business would bear a thorough investigation, I said to the detective, "Come in. We are always glad to have people make investigations concerning our work." When he was invited to take a seat and make himself at home, he gave us to understand that he had no time to spare and that his business was urgent and very important. After repeating his statement concerning his object in coming, he was told that we were only too glad to have him make the investigation, that the office was open from attic to cellar, and that everything was at his disposal. He could go alone and make his investigation in every nook and corner, or we would send somebody with him, or I would go with him myself, and he could make a thorough examination also of our books and business affairs, and have the liberty of asking any questions he desired, and if we could not answer them, we would tell him our reasons for not doing so. This seemed to put him at ease and to quiet any fears he may have had of not being able to make a thorough investigation. After a few minutes' conversation, he was asked who had reported against us. He finally admitted that it was Mr. Wyrick. I took from my desk a letter which Wyrick had written to me some time previous, in which he had made threats that were not allowed to be sent through the mail. But when I presented it, the detective replied, "No, sir, I have all the evidence I desire, and do not wish to read the letter. I only wish you to know the character of the man who has manufactured and furnished the evidence which you possess," I replied. He still insisted that he did not have any time to waste in examining such letters, as his evidence was completed, and that all that was necessary now was to make the investigation and carry out the plans according to his official duty. "But," I insisted, as I held the letter before him, "you will readily recognize the handwriting of this letter to be the same as that of the letters in your possession." "Yes, sir," he replied, "it is the same." And he listened while I read a few striking and convincing sentences. He then became more pliable. Stepping into another room, I took a large postal card from my letter files. It was the same card that Mr. Wyrick had written over 5 years before, and the one I'd presented to him at the depot. This card was written from Geneva, Illinois, and signed "A Friend," and, as before stated, contained 535 words. As it was presented to the detective, he at once recognized the handwriting as being the same as that of the letters which were in his possession from this same man. "Let me read what he has to say on this card." "No, sir, I have no time for such matters," he replied. "But you must hear it. You say you have an abundance of evidence against us, and the contents of this card will undoubtedly help to clear up matters in your mind, and you must hear it read." And without waiting for further reply, I began reading, first calling his attention again to the fact that it was signed "A Friend," as though someone else had written it. The card began by telling what a good man Mr. Wyrick was. The writer stated that he was well acquainted with him, and that Wyrick was a man who loved his wife and family, and treated them with the greatest respect and provided for them. It continued with scurrilous statements against others, and such praise of himself that when the card was half read, the detective sprang to his feet, saying, "Mr. Byrum, I will tell you what to do. You tell that wife of his to go and take a course in athletics, and bring her clubs home and use them on him. That man is crazy. Goodbye." And he started for the door. "Hold on," I replied. "You came here with charges against us, and for the purpose of making an investigation, and we wish to know what the charges are, and also to have you make an investigation to your satisfaction." "I am satisfied," he replied. "That man is crazy. I have no charges whatever against you or your company. However, had the charges been true, and I had made my investigation and found things as reported, it was my intention to take you along with me to prison." The detective then took the time to tell us many things concerning the matter and concerning his misgivings in regard to the truthfulness of the reports against us. He said, "Let me see that card again," and after examining the date of it, he continued, "Were it not that it had been more than 5 years since this was written, this man would go to the penitentiary instead of your being prosecuted on account of the charges which he has made as the penalty for sending such statements through the United States mail on a postal card. It is from 2 to 5 years imprisonment and $2,000 to $5,000 fine, one or both at the discretion of the court." We further urged him to examine our books and made a thorough investigation of our business, but he refused to do so and went his way satisfied. The man who was determined to be our adversary, although having been thwarted in his former attempts to do us injury, was not satisfied to discontinue his efforts. A few weeks later, he wrote me a letter from Rockford, Illinois, at which place he was living at that time. In his writing, he exhibited a very friendly attitude and gave me a special invitation to come to Rockford. He stated that, on account of the circumstances, he was not at liberty to tell me in detail the nature of the situation, but that he wished to see me on very urgent business, and asked that I say nothing to anyone concerning my going to Rockford, and not to reveal anyone his name in connection with my going. He gave instructions concerning the time to leave home so that I would arrive at Rockford on a train that reached the city about 11 o'clock at night. He would be there to meet me and would escort me to the proper place where the business could be attended to in a very short time after my arrival. To his mind, no doubt, the letter was shrewdly written, and the plans well laid to entrap me. But as soon as I read the letter, I was reminded of the dream that I had had 7 years previous to that time, in which this man had tried to murder me. And I was not so foolish as to take a trip under such circumstances, even had I known that there was no malicious intentions back of it. I committed the matter entirely into the hands of the Lord, knowing that he would protect from the snares of the enemy and send deliverance from the hand of the oppressor. The man made one more attempt to harass me with his threats and pernicious plannings, which were utterly ignored, and in answer to prayer the Lord thwarted him in such undertakings. Then for several years we did not know of his whereabouts, till finally one Sunday at the close of a morning service in Omaha, Nebraska, a woman came forward and took me by the hand, telling me that she was the wife of J.W. Wyrick. After making some inquiry concerning her husband, I learned the following. For a few years he had been in an insane asylum, and a few weeks previous to this time he was at the point of death, and she requested to the officials of the asylum to permit him to be brought home to die. But since his return home he had rapidly grown better in mind and in body, and was able to walk about the house. After I had expressed my desires to see him, she urged me to call at their home that afternoon. During the visit, she told me of many things concerning his past life and of his enmity against ministers and anyone who preached the gospel in all its purity. She also referred to the time when he had sent for me to go to Rockford, and said that he surely would have murdered me had I come at that time. Before permitting me to go to his room, she said that he had been like a cage of demons, and that he was possessed with evil spirits, and urged me not to tell my name lest he become unnecessarily enraged. I was anxious to see the man who had so bitterly opposed not only me, but so many of the people of God, and felt a great sense of pity for him as I left the others who were present and entered the room alone with him. As he arose and I took him by the hand, I shall never forget the demonic look that he gave me, although I felt assured that God would protect me from any danger. And while he could talk in a rational manner, yet he seemed to have no inclination or desire to receive help from God. The man who had so often rebelled against God, cursed his people, and imbibed such a spirit of enmity, was led captive by the devil until the last, and a few weeks later he died as he had lived, and passed into eternity to meet his doom.